Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we talk about the latest news, information and analysis of what's really going on in Russia and the BRICS. Now, my name is Rod McKenzie, and today I want to talk about Donald Trump's US tariffs conflict with China. Now, it would appear that despite Donald Trump's bluster and rhetoric, it's the USA that's blinked first in the tariff war with China. Now, it's been reported that the US and China have each had to make concessions in concluding a trade agreement. However, it is pretty obvious that the US blinked first, as it appears that Beijing's strategic action in restricting American access to rare earth metals has worked. Now, that was significant because a number of US industries associated with their use, including the global automotive industry, microelectronics and the defence industry, were facing serious difficulties with shortages of rare earth metals from China. So the US President Donald John Trump has announced an agreement with China on tariffs and the restarting of supplies of rare earth metals to the USA. The agreement with China has been finalised, Trump stated, and I'm in the process of concluding the details with President Xi. It seems the agreement stipulates that tariffs on Chinese goods in the US will be reduced from 145% to 55%, and China will reduce its tariffs on US imports from 125% to 10%. Now, before I continue, I would like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, SCOBRICSInsight.com, and you can do this by making a small donation, which is done by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Every donation does get a personal thank you from me, and also set the alert button so you get notified when I post a new video, and also keep the comments coming, as I love to read and respond to them. Now, in addition to this, Beijing will be offering the US the opportunity to purchase rare earth metals and magnets months in advance. Now, the US will also be lifting restrictions on Chinese students studying at US colleges and universities. And last week it was revealed that China was bureaucratically delaying the issuance of export licenses for rare earth metals. Now, these metals, as we all know, are essential for the production of cars, electronics and defence projects. So that could have potentially led to a genuine shortage of rare earth metals in a number of industries. And the car makers around the world were the first to scream and shout about their concerns, with fears that their plants would be shut down and they would face significant financial losses. Now, this covert bureaucratic strategy by China seemingly had a sobering effect on Mr. Donald Trump. Not that he drinks alcohol, I understand, but certainly made of coffin to his Diet Coke. Now, the recent agreement between China and the US to reduce tariffs is a significant development. It's also been well received by the financial markets. Now, this indicates a shift in the largest economies towards the de-escalating of the trade conflict. Now, China's strategic approach with rare earth metals has obviously proved effective, and the US is not prepared to jeopardize its supply chains, according to Pavel Sestyanov, who's Professor of Political Analysis and Social Psychological Processes at the Blenkinov Russian University of Economics. He said the issue of rare earth metals is first and foremost importance in trade relations between the US and China. Let's recall, China is responsible for 70% of global production and 90% of the processing of rare earth metals, which are critical to the industrial sectors of the US. Now, at the same time, China is also expanding its presence in countries that have significant reserves on rare earth metals and is engaged in processes for their extraction and processing, according to Ksenia Bondarenko, who's Professor of World Economy at the National Research University of the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Now, from the perspective of the American automotive industry, this is a positive development. It means their components will certainly become cheaper and their electric cars will become more competitive on the marketplace. However, Sestyanov notes that the Europeans have still to negotiate with Beijing That said, as Bondarenko notes, there's considerable uncertainty in this area. Well, you never know with the EU, of course. I mean, for China, this means the restrictions are easing on about access to American technology, especially for the semiconductor industry, which is already of critical importance for the development of the Chinese computer and chip industry. As they say, for them, it's a win-win situation. Plus, the US's decision to lift the ban on Chinese students to universities can be interpreted as a symbolic gesture of goodwill, who's according to Evgeny Baboshkin, who's head of business development at Prime Brokerage Services. Now let's look at the commercial aspect. The tariffs have already had their unintended consequences. I mean, from February 2025, when the US initiated the significant escalation on tariffs from China, they peaked at 145% in April, right? Then China adopted a similar attitude, implementing tariffs of 125% on the US, and that triggered a significant contraction in trade between the two countries. I mean, in May, Chinese exports to the US fell by 12.7%, and US companies began to express serious concerns about the rising costs and their supply chain disruptions. Now, in response, the US has seen preemptive price increases across the electronic gadgets there. Virtually the entire range of manufacturers from Apple, Dell, etc., as well as the batteries and auto parts. Electric vehicle and home appliance companies have been particularly affected, says Baboshkin. Now, the probability of a complete reversion back to the golden era of trade witnessed in the 2010s is not going to happen. That's not on the agenda. But both countries are expressing and exercising increased caution. On the one hand, the US is continuing to diversify its supply sources, strengthening its partnerships with Mexico, Vietnam, and BRICS member India. In contrast, China is prioritising the development of its domestic market and the strengthening of its ties within the Southeast Asia and the Middle East markets. Now, the temporary easing of tariffs will affect the direct indicators of the US-Chinese trade turnover, but it's not actually going to change the volumes of Chinese exports and US imports, because the demand for Chinese goods cannot be limited just by administrative decisions, according to Kanaz Bagirashan, who's a senior researcher at the International Laboratory for Foreign Trade Research at the Institute of Applied Economic Research. Now, in the modern global economy, as we know, is characterized by the formation of mega blocks. Now, the United States is integrated to the US, Mexico, Canada Free Trade Zone, or the North NAFTA, as I think it used to be called, with Mexico, Canada, and China is part of the Asian Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the RCEP, which unites 15 countries in Southeast Asia. Now, these structures facilitate flexible diversification of trade flows through the partner countries. For instance, a 10 billion decrease in the US-China trade in 2024 was balanced by an increase in Chinese exports to ASEAN countries by the same amount. That's Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Now, the initial 4 months of the year, there was also an increase in supplies to that region of 21 billion from China, and by the end of 2024, this figure is expected to reach 70 billion. Indeed, China uses countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore and Indonesia as a re-export hub for its products to the US. Similarly, some goods might also be sent to Mexico where then they're redirected duty-free to the US market. So this practice is actually global in nature. I mean, Russia, for example, is an active user of the Eurasian Economic Union mechanisms for parallel imports and re-exports. Therefore, analysts believe that even if direct trade between the US and China decreases down to 500 billion in 2025, the total volume of the trade between both countries will remain the same. I mean, while American consumers will continue to purchase Chinese goods, the complexity and cost of those supplies will eventually impact on the prices. mean, for Russia, this agreement's not actually got any major or direct consequences, but there's a possibility of an indirect effect. Now, that weakening of the trade conflict has the potential to support the global economy and raise oil prices. Conversely, the escalation has the potential to impact energy prices in general, particularly gas as well. However, in the long term, Russia will remain outside these processes since the global model is changing, says the Yulia Kandashenko, who's the broker at Mind Money. So, China's experienced a decline in demand for its products in the high-tech sector, and the mutual trade between the US and China fell by 10 billion in April, indicating real losses for some people, but it's clear that trends towards stabilisation is now happening. And it should be noted that the easing of the duties will not restore volumes immediately because that takes time. But it will be a cause of relief for the global manufacturers from Japan to South Korea, because obviously they were dramatically affected. So anyway, that's the situation between Donald Trump, President Xi, and China. So thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And if you enjoy the videos and you want to make a donation, click on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. And I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.